My name is Andy, and I film the videos at the Imperfects. I'm the son of English immigrants, and I am grateful to call Australia home. We at the Imperfects acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, and extend our respects to their elders past and present. I am inspired by the strength and endurance of the world's oldest living culture, and we draw on and pay homage to their traditions of story when we share stories on our podcast.
Well, top of the whatever time you're listening to this to you, and welcome to the Academy of Imperfection, where experts in their field share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. Today, Dr. Richard Harris, aka Harry, the Australian anaesthetist who helped save 13 trapped boys from a Thai cave, is here to deep dive, pun intended, on the ins and outs of risk.
You know, we need to be able to escape the watchful eyes of our parents from a pretty early age, actually, and go and do that stuff and do some naughty things and make some mistakes and work out where the boundaries are. And that way we start to learn what is safe and what is not safe, and we slowly expand those boundaries and learn to be risk managers.
So press pause on the current episode of Some Mothers Do Have 'Em and join students Hugh, Ryan and Josh and get risky with Dr. Richard Harris.
Well, this is a special one today. We are joined by, if you don't know Dr. Richard Harris's name, you will almost definitely remember the story of the 12 boys and their coach who were trapped inside the flooded caves in Thailand in 2018. Dr. Richard Harris was the anaesthetist who was pivotal to saving the boys' lives. He was sent to perform health and fitness assessments on the boys and then advise officials on how to get them out. In fact, I'm going to read this bit here because I don't want to get it wrong, but as part of the rescue, he was required to dive. This is my nightmare. As part of the rescue, he was required to dive, swim and climb to safety along a pitch black tunnel that at certain points barely allowed an adult to fit through, with some spaces only being 38 centimetres wide. And how long was it again? It was 6 hours in and 5 hours out, is that right?
Well, firstly, Hugh, congratulations on being able to say anaesthetist. You've done very well.
Yeah, I was impressed with that.
Thank you so much.
That's a big tick because you're one of the few who can say it without training, so that's a good job.
That's what the whole degree is.
In fact, we had a business manager at our office who couldn't say anaesthetist, so when she was answering the phones, it was just a big fail. So well done. Now to get back to the facts of the case,
We've avoided the Dr. Richard Harris walkout, which often happens.
No, so some slight exaggerations there. So it was 2.4 kilometres long from the entrance to where the kids were. And this question of 39 or 38 centimetres, I don't know where that came from. A reporter who clearly had never been in the cave came up with this magical number, and it was one of a huge number of bits of misinformation that evolved during the rescue. And I don't blame the reporters for this because they were literally in the dark. They were outside the cave, we were inside doing our thing, and no information was being fed to them. So they started to fabricate all this fabulous factoids. And yeah, that was one of the measurements that someone apparently took a ruler inside to come out with this very precise, sort of calibrated gap in the cave. But anyway, so I'm more than 39 centimetres across, I can assure you, especially with scuba tanks on. So I don't know where that number came from. But yes, wow. The answer is it was pretty tight in places.
Okay. And am I right in saying it was 6 hours in and 5 hours out?
No, 3 hours each way.
Okay.
That's a decent dive.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a good day out.
Good day out.
I haven't got to his awards yet. Can I do it?
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, give you the 10 minutes you'll need to get through the award.
Yeah, because I'm going to keep interrupting and bagging you at regular intervals.
Please feel free. So Richard was awarded the Star of Courage for unwavering and selfless bravery following the successful rescue of the trapped soccer team, and the Order of Australia for service to the international community. And then in 2019, alongside Dr. Craig Challen, they were named as the first Dual Australians of the Year for their role in the rescue mission. Richard currently works for the South Australian Ambulance Medical Retrieval Service. I feel like people must be absolutely beside themselves when you turn up.
Well, all that would have been true up until Christmas this year when
Okay.
I've actually just retired from medicine. So
right.
my life has taken a new and exciting twist. I don't know if you want to get into that now, but
Well, you have written a book, which I am reading right now, and I absolutely love it. It's The Art of Risk, and we will talk about it at some point because it's such a wonderful topic for you to be exploring. But I think should we start just talking a bit more about the cave diving? Because because you write about it beautifully, but I read it twice because I was so captivated by it. You talk about it to you being not an overly dangerous thing, or it wasn't a risk. You didn't feel like it was a risky thing to do for you. I mean, you were just at home in Australia and you were reading about this in the paper, and then all of a sudden, an anaesthetist who can cave dive is the perfect person for this scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And who, I never thought that perfect storm of skill sets would be something that I would never, ever need to use. But on the other hand, I was sort of prepared for it. And if I can sort of go back in time a little bit to sort of how this all came together. I grew up in Adelaide in South Australia and have always, since my earliest memories, been in love with the ocean and being in the water. And, for me, that started out snorkeling and so forth, and eventually went and got my diving ticket when I was about 15 years of age, and went on to be an instructor at the University Dive Club. And so it's always been a big part of my life.
What is it about the ocean? Can you put into words what it is that drew you to it so strongly at a young age?
There's a couple of things. I mean, I still get a buzz out of the fact that you can put your head underwater and be breathing from a scuba tank. I just think that's so cool. And every time I do it still, however many years later, I just get a little kick out of that. The fact that I can be swimming around underwater breathing out of this scuba tank. I think that's a very cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I became fascinated by the aquatic life, from the biggest fish to the plants to the little bugs and critters that crawl around. I was kind of set on being a marine biologist when I was at school. That sort of evolved into maybe veterinary science, and then that evolved into medicine in the end. But you change as you grow, and that love for the ocean and that environment still stays with me. But in my university days with the Uni Dive Club, we decided to go down to the Mount Gambier area of South Australia, where there's all these beautiful freshwater caves and sinkholes, and just try that as an experience. Just, I didn't know a lot about it, but I thought we'll go down there and see what it's all about. And initially I didn't really relish it because, I was a poor uni student. I had a pretty ordinary wetsuit. The water down there is very cold, and the training's actually very robust. As you can imagine, you need to be well prepared for that environment. There are some very obvious hazards, and it can be dangerous. So the training is intentionally pretty tough, and they put you through your paces. And I came away from it having enjoyed that training, but you don't actually get to see very much of the caves because half the time you've got a blindfold on or someone's pulling the regulator out of your mouth.
Blindfold on?
Yeah, I mean, they put you through all these stress tests is what we call them. So that if, the thing about being in a cave is you cannot ascend directly to the surface. You have to be very self-sufficient because if you have a problem with your air supply, you have to exit the cave and then before you can go up to the surface. So you need to be able to look after yourself for a period of time. You can't just bolt up to the surface like you may be able to do in the ocean. Mm-hmm. So they teach you to be very self-sufficient, and you need to have redundancy in all your equipment, but you need this extra training to be safe. And I enjoyed all that side of it, and especially the gear, sort of increased level of technology and equipment that you require. I thought it was all pretty cool, but as I say, you don't actually get to see much of the caves during that training. So I thought, take it or leave it. I didn't do very much for the next few years. But then in the year 2000, I went back to revisit those caves, and I got to see some of the really spectacular sights down there. And I just absolutely fell in love with it again. Mm. And so for the last 23 years, really, it's been a bit of an obsession, to be honest. Mm. So I had that sort of skill set behind me. And then in parallel, of course, I was studying medicine and went on to become an anaesthetist. And anaesthesia's a great specialty for someone like me because there are lots of other avenues to explore outside of the operating theatre where you would typically picture an anaesthetist working. And so intensive care work, I did some diving and hyperbaric medicine, which is often affiliated with anaesthesia. And also did some aeromedical.
Sorry, what is that? The diving in?
So diving medicine, I guess, is self-explanatory, treating people with decompression sickness or the bends in a chamber.
Okay, yeah.
But the other arm of that is in the hyperbaric chamber, a chamber which you can seal and pressurize and give people oxygen as a treatment. We also treat people with various types of chronic wounds, radiotherapy, injuries, things like that. So,
Wow.
And the other thing I got involved with was pre-hospital and aeromedical work, which was your reference to the South Australian Ambulance Service. So basically our service covered the entire state of South Australia, and we would fly or drive out to people who require critical care, basically intensive care type patients, either through accidents or trauma or illness. And so the sickest people from around the state needing to be stabilised and brought back to the metropolitan hospitals, which is really exciting and challenging and difficult work, because often working in very austere environments, you might be in a shearing shed, picking up someone from a farm who's got some critical illness or near fatal condition and stabilising them and bringing them back to town. So, a lot of thinking on your feet, working in small teams, a lot of trust, within the teams, and I found it very, very satisfying. So all of those experiences put me in this perfect position to be able to offer some assistance to these kids. And as you know, I ended up anaesthetising the children to bring them out underwater because we assumed they would panic if we didn't.
Which originally, when that was suggested to you by someone, you said this is just 1 in a million. There's no. Oh, you basically said I can't see this working. Is that right?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I was 100% sure in my own mind that all those children would die if we did that, because I don't think you need to be a cave diver or an anaesthetist to realise that if you render someone unconscious and then push their heads underwater for what will be a 3-hour journey through the cave in very difficult conditions.
Well, pitch black as well.
They're not going to survive that. So
it's astonishing. I when it actually happened, for whatever reason, I just wasn't following along the story. Like, I'd hear about it, I just wasn't following the details. So my proper introduction to the actual details of it was watching the Ron Howard film. And so Ron Howard directed the film, and so there's and Joel Edgerton plays you. And even though I knew the outcome, it's just one of the most tense films. How accurate was the film in regards to what actually happened?
It's Hollywood, and so there was a bit of exaggeration. Joel's role was the heroic aspects of it were fairly exaggerated, I think, particularly at the end when he goes rushing back into the flooding cave. I think that was all a bit excessive.
Of course, yeah.
But the basic outline is there. I think the more factual accounts for me were the Rescue, which was the National Geographic documentary.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Where we did some interviews, and also Netflix did a series, but they also did a documentary which concentrated on the kids and their families. And they interviewed all those people, and that for me was actually maybe the best of all of them, because that's what I always wanted to know, was what were those kids feeling and experiencing in that cave. And I only got to hear that, through that final documentary, which was the last thing to come out. I think that's called The 13 Trapped. So that's, I always tell people, if you want to know the facts, look at the Nat Geo doco called The Rescue and that final Netflix little doco called The 13 Trapped.
Because the moment that I can think of is because they play it out in the film, and you can see Joel Edgerton playing you, talking to there's Viggo Mortensen and
Colin Farrell, and the discussions. So the way they portray it is when you arrive at the cave, you don't know really what you're being asked to do. Is that what? Oh, there was a bit of a bending of the truth there. So I'd spoken to Rick Stanton, played by your man Viggo.
Yeah.
And
not that he's now my man.
And so I knew Rick already. We'd been on a couple of expeditions before, and he and his mate John Valanthan are kind of the rock stars of cave diving in our little world. It's not a huge sport worldwide. I can't really understand why. It doesn't seem to be particularly popular. But those two guys, and actually the other British divers who turned up, people we highly regard in the sport. And I was very pleased when I heard they were attending and that they were involved, because I thought if anyone can find these kids, whether the kids were dead or alive at that stage, it'll be these blokes.
Okay.
So with the help of the Thai Navy SEALs and some of the European expats who were living in Thailand, some other cave divers, they laid that rope all the way through the cave to when they finally found the boys in Chamber 9. I think we all remember that incredible bit of footage from John Valanthen's GoPro when he calls out to those kids, how many of you are there? And one of the boys, Abdul, who spoke a little bit of English, said 13. The whole world went, oh my God, they're alive. It's, against all odds, those children have been found alive after 9 days, sitting there in the dark with no food. How is that possible? We just all assumed they were deceased. So that was like when that story went mental and the whole world started watching, I think. And as you mentioned, I had read something in the newspaper in Adelaide on about day 2 that these kids were lost in a cave, and I thought, that could be something I end up being involved with, because I've had this long-standing interest in cave rescue. And in fact, we'd been training for an event like this, although we assumed we'd be rescuing one of our friends or, having ourselves rescued. Maybe we'd fall and break a leg in a remote cave chamber and we'd need to be taken out underwater to get back to the surface. So we'd started to think about it and prepare for that. And I'd actually been running some training programs around Australia and a little bit in New Zealand to help kind of work out the best way to do it and teach other cavers, how we might approach it. So I had all the information.
It's like your entire life.
I know. It's
like your entire life was getting ready for this moment.
Yeah, and that's the way I kind of felt when this call finally came.
So how did they know about you? I mean, if I was you, I'd be like going, who do I call? I need to get over there. I need to, do I need to just...
to be honest, I had been pretty unsubtle about my hints to the people on the ground that I knew, saying, I've got a feeling I need to be over there. This has got my name on it. And so I was talking to Rick Stanton. I was talking to a guy called Ben Raymonence, who's a Belgian guy that I'd done an expedition in Thailand previous year, actually, I think. So I knew some of the locals and I knew some of the people on the ground, and I was messaging them saying, I think I can help. And we were exchanging ideas and advice and stuff. But to be honest, Rick was saying, I don't think there's any point because the kids are almost certainly dead. And then even after they were found, he said, well, they're alive, but they might as well be dead because there's no possible way to bring them out.
So you were in contact with Rick throughout this?
Yeah.
Okay. Because in my mind, the Hollywood version is like, he's like, well, we've reached a crossroads. There's only one man that can help us now.
Better call Harris.
Harry.
Yeah. I wish that were the case, but no, I was in his face saying, you got to get me over here, man.
Yeah. Is there a Harris signal that he puts in the air?
That's right, the Batman thing.
Yeah.
I pictured someone over there in charge just going, if only there was such thing, as an anaesthetist who was also an experienced cave diver who'd been training people in rescue, but that person doesn't exist. That's how
Well, in fact, I like to think, or people say that surely you're the only person in the world who was qualified, but that's actually not the case. I know several cave diving anaesthetists around the world who are equally competent and would have been absolutely fine to go. But I think Stanton has actually told me that I think he thought I was the only person who might be silly enough to actually say yes. So I take that as a great compliment, but I suspect that's not.
Was there any element, so when you get so you obviously put your hand up and you're suggesting that you want to be involved. So there's obvious, you don't really know how, but I feel like I want to be involved. In my mind, this is maybe just how I would feel, but with the world watching like it was, this wasn't just like a normal rescue. This is like, in my mind, I would feel the pressure of everyone watching. Did you feel that?
No, I didn't actually. And I don't know whether it's because I'm naive or stupid or blind, but I didn't really perceive this to be I didn't realise the scale of the global interest in this story, and maybe had I known that, then I would have felt that pressure. And even when I arrived in Thailand and, I remember getting out of this van that dropped me off at the cave entrance and basically opened the door to this sea of media. Like I've never seen a wall of cameras and news people, anything like it. And even then I thought, a lot of interest from the Thais, obviously. And I just assumed it was all local media.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, by then, everyone was there. We had Australian reporters there and CNN and you name it, BBC. They were all there apparently. But I was oblivious to that, which was good because I was just so focused on the business at hand that I don't think any of that really registered, to be honest.
Yeah.
In my mind, because I love sport, when you see NBA basketballers getting out of a bus, arriving at a venue with headphones on, and I'm picturing you like that.
I should have put my headphones on and sort of bounced up the road.
Just the big Beats headphones on, just in his own world.
Just chewing gum, just ignoring reporters on the way through.
That's right. No, I just put my head down and ran for it. And actually, the Australian Federal Police, some fairly burly gentlemen from the sort of door-kicking section of the AFP were there, and they shepherded us and looked after us and protected us a lot from all that, so that we could get on with the job.
And so just want to go back to what you said before, that anaesthetising the boys to get them out, that was the suggestion. You said that won't work.
That came from Rick before I left Australia. Yeah. He sent me, we were exchanging messages, and he said, what do you think about sedating the boys? And I actually laughed when I saw the message and I just texted back, no, that's not an option.
Because I'm guessing to keep people alive, even in operating theatre, there's a lot of situations that you need to control in order to keep people alive and to keep them in a safe position. So to be doing it in a cave.
I mean, we have the lights on for a start. You'll be pleased to hear.
You're above water.
Yeah, the operating theatre is not full of water. We have monitors on the patient. We have expert assistants.
So you're saying the conditions in the cave were different than you would usually?
I think a little bit different.
Slightly different.
A bit different.
Interesting. Not what I would have assumed.
No, you wouldn't have occurred to most people.
And so, but am I right in saying the reason that you decided, okay, we'll do this is because really, what other choice did you have? Is that's
what it came down to. Yeah. And so what happened, very briefly, was that Craig and myself dived the cave, went through the cave, to make sure we were safe in it, because guys like Rick Stanton say that it's not too bad. We needed to see for ourselves that we were safe, because the first priority is always to your own safety in these situations. If you get injured or worse, then you're a liability and you're a burden to the primary focus, which is these kids. So we had to make sure we were safe. The other thing was I just needed to see these kids for myself and make this very abstract concept of what we were doing something more concrete in my mind. And of course, once I'd seen these kids and met them and seen how calm and courageous and beautiful these boys were, well, that was it. There's no way I was leaving Thailand without doing something.
Gosh. Wow.
And even though right up till pretty much till the last boy came out that I thought that they would not survive what I was doing, essentially I felt like I was probably euthanizing them. And you would say, well, why would you ever embark on something if that's what you genuinely believed? And the answer is that the alternative was even worse, and that was that they would die over weeks probably from starvation or infection and suffocate because the oxygen levels in the cave were falling. So given those two choices, what is anyone going to do? You're either going to do this thing, which is, sometimes just positive action is better than doing nothing, because you can't. I knew, put it this way, I knew I couldn't get on a plane and fly home to Adelaide and leave them now that I'd met them.
Yeah.
So that left one option: give this thing a go, even though I thought it was, almost certainly courting disaster.
Do you think that you're? How do I say this properly? I can only say it from my perspective that having no medical training, if meeting those boys obviously I wouldn't meet them in that situation, but an equivalent situation, the meeting of the boys and seeing them as real people, I would find potentially so emotionally overwhelming that it would render me potentially unable to make a clear decision. Do you think it was your medical training or you were just born with the ability to find clarity and a sense of sort of focus after meeting them?
I would say my medical training had the major part to do with that, because if you work in critical care medicine, like I have done, you are constantly faced with people who are threatening to take their last breath, I guess, and you need to have to intervene and act efficiently and competently to try and do your best to save their lives. And I guess people are self-selected to some degree to enjoy and want to do that kind of medicine. And look, it's not all excitement and drama like that, but those situations arise, and especially working in that aeromedical space, they arise pretty frequently. So, you have to look forward to the challenge of those situations rather than dreading them. And I remember a friend of mine who I started my anaesthetics training with, and the guy was amazing, great doctor, very compassionate, very skilled and competent as an anaesthetist. But he suddenly decided to stop. And I said, well, what are you doing? You're so good at this. And he said, I just can't handle that sense of responsibility that you have every time you give those anaesthetic drugs to someone. You render them unconscious, they stop breathing. You then have to take over their vital functions. And if you fail to do that, then obviously, the clock starts and brain damage follows 3 to 5 minutes later, if they're not breathing and you can't support their airway and take over their breathing for them. And it hadn't really occurred to me that that's what we do every time we give someone an anaesthetic. And this is not to frighten people about anaesthetics, but it just is a reflection of how good modern anaesthesia is and how good the training of anaesthetists is and how skilled we become in that role, that we can just do that on a day-to-day basis. But for this guy, he just sort of overthought it and he thought, no, I just can't do that every day.
Yeah.
And I kind of get that. So if you're not that kind of person, or that's not a responsibility you're prepared to accept, then that job's not for you, which is fine.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you settle into that line of work, then what you've just said doesn't apply so much. You become deconditioned, I guess, to that response. I have to tell you, the first few times I did it by myself, it was absolutely terrifying.
Putting someone under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember the first anaesthetic I gave by myself in England in the middle of the night without supervision. I was bricking it. I've never been so frightened.
Wow.
But then, that goes well, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then maybe that's a career stopper for you. But if it goes well, then you just gradually build experience and confidence. And, cave diving is very similar because the risks are very clear and apparent. But you build experience slowly. You broaden your experience slowly. You go further. You go deeper. You become more complex in your diving. And you have small frights regularly to broaden your kind of comfort zone, your sphere of experience, or if that's the way to put it, until you look back and you go, gosh, look at what I'm doing now, like that cave in Thailand compared to my first few cave dives 20-something years ago. I never would have been able to manage in the Thai cave when I first started cave diving. But for me, now that environment was actually not uncomfortable. It was what I do for fun on the weekends almost. So, a lot of people look at what we did in Thailand and go, oh, you're very brave to go into that cave. Well, that's actually not the case because that's my recreational pursuit.
Yeah.
So you can put the cave diving to one side in the kind of, the courage stakes in this rescue. For me, what I'm proud of is, finding that courage to make the decision to go ahead. But at the same time, I felt like I didn't have any choice. So
Wow.
If it were me, thank God it wasn't. If it were me, I would put a lot of thought into what happens if it doesn't work past the boys not making it. So your prediction was, I don't think the boys are going to make it. This is not going to work. Did you put much thought into what happens then when you come back to Australia, or did you have any fears about what people might think, or because that is a big part of risk? I guess your book is about risk, and a big part of risk for me at least is weighing up the options and going like, okay, well, what is the outcome of either scenario, the successful or the failed scenario?
Yeah, again, whether it's naivety or stupidity, I didn't sort of think it through.
Yeah.
Which maybe, it's a blessing maybe to be so short-sighted that you can only focus on the goal in front of you and not think maybe through the bigger implications. My wife, on the other hand, was having all those exact thoughts, and she was very concerned, not for my physical safety in the cave, because I've stressed her pretty much comprehensively over the last 20 years by disappearing down, holes all around the world. And I think she's just too tired of worrying to worry anymore. So, so she actually said she wasn't worried about my personal safety in the cave, but she was very worried about my mental health if the kids died. She was very worried about my career as an anaesthetist if the kids died. And she was worried about the sort of fallout, the social media, Monday morning quarterbacks would be out in force without question. And I recognise that now. So, she's much smarter than me and could see all this stuff coming.
That's probably why you were so well prepared for this specific job. Because maybe if you were someone who was more worried about public opinion and things like that, then you maybe wouldn't have been
The thing is, I am pretty thin-skinned and I do worry about stuff like that.
Oh, interesting.
I like to be liked, and I don't like hearing people don't like me or that kind of negative feedback that more robust individuals go, well, I don't care what you think of me. I'm not like that at all. I'm very sensitive, actually.
So we're going forward a long way in the story, but just on that point, was there an element of stress that came with being an Australian of the Year? If that was something where you're thinking, God, now everyone knows me and I don't necessarily want to be known by everyone, is that?
Yeah, you couldn't have hit the nail on the head better, really. In fact, Craig and I actively hid from the media, from the spotlight as soon as we came back from Thailand, and we suddenly realised that this was a huge story and that we were now, at least in Australia, the focus of it. And it was quite a shock, to be honest, and quite unwelcome. I remember I got home on the Friday night and a mate of mine turned up on Saturday morning just to say good day and say welcome back and glad you're alive. And he said, oh, by the way, did you know all the news crews are out the front? And I went, what? And he said, yeah, there's like all the TV stations are out the front of your house. And I went, oh, bloody hell, what do I do? And so I rang my sister-in-law, who's been working in sort of PR and marketing, and I said, Juliet, do you know any tips? How do I get rid of these people? And she said, I'll be right round. So she spoke to her.
Sign a book deal.
Yeah, right. Well, that was, of course, all that followed as well. And so Juliet spoke to all the TV people, and she came in and said, right, you've got a couple of options. You can go out there and do a Q&A. I would highly recommend you do not do that. Yeah, good advice. She said you could go and read a statement to them and then just turn on your heels and walk back inside, or you can just say something and then say, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Goodbye. And so I thought, oh, God, this is my worst nightmare. I was terrified, and it was far more frightening than anything in Thailand.
Had you done like any public speaking or anything at this point?
I've always hated public speaking.
Right.
That's been one of my biggest phobias through my life.
Okay.
And I've done a little bit of stuff with the media through just under the sort of emergency services stuff and, just talking at scenes and,
But no global media speeches.
No. So I just went out the front and babbled something saying, I hope you can sort of respect our privacy and not taking any more further questions at this time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Just taking it 1 week at a time.
Yeah, exactly. And I ran inside and that satisfied them and they all left. So that was brilliant. Actually, this is a funny story.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Whilst I was in Thailand, I love this little story about my family sort of trying to protect me from all this. While I was in Thailand, of course, the media interest was growing. Who is the doctor from Australia who's gone over there? And
the mysterious Harry.
Yeah, and who's his friend? And, who are these guys? And then they worked out my name and, it sort of slowly evolved. And anyway, the media showed up on the front door one night and the door knock came and Fiona went to the front door and it's,
Fiona's your wife?
Yep.
Yep.
It's someone from Channel whatever. And she said, no, we're not talking to the media. Thank you. Goodbye. And so James, my son, who had just done his first year of law, I think, at that stage at uni, said, oh, Mum, apparently if you write no trespassers on the front gate, they're not allowed to come in. So James wrote this sign on a bit of plywood. but he spelt trespassers wrong. It had too many S's in it. And I think we've still got a photo of that fabulous sign, but it worked. The boy genius, the lawyer, he scared them all off. So, we're very proud of him. Yes, his trespassers. I wish I'd kept that sign.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Anyway, he didn't continue with law.
When you copy editing.
Yeah, well, he just, that's right.
So
I mean, you have now written this wonderful book around the art of risk taking, and you have acknowledged in your mind you didn't feel like, for you personally, what you're doing is putting yourself at risk. but you have become fascinated with the topic of risk taking. So
Yeah.
you've talked to a whole lot of the people, around the world who do take risks every day and to gather their knowledge. So maybe we should go on to that now.
Yeah,
I
I
still
think
have so many questions.
Well,
like-
this is an academy, I guess. We
We need to get on
True.
that.
Okay. Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll be a 2-part podcast.
I know.
we got no problems with that. I mean, there has to be a big element of risk taking in cave diving. I know in this instance here, potentially not, but you just said before that you push yourself and you find yourselves in scarier situations or situations that elevate your expertise, I guess. Would it be possible, I hope this isn't a lazy question, but just to summarise what you've learned from different people, which you think might be really interesting in the area of risk taking?
Yeah, I might just start, if it's all right, just by saying why I kind of went down this path. Because, for the last 20 years or more, people have said to me, you must be crazy to do that thing that I do, which is my love for cave diving. And to be fair, that's a completely reasonable first assumption, because it is people's deepest primal fear, I think, to be underground, underwater, with a finite gas supply to breathe. I mean,
It terrifies me.
Yeah,
the
so,
idea of it,
the idea that you could get lost underwater in a labyrinth and you've got 60 minutes of air to breathe, and so the clock is ticking and your time starts now, sort of thing.
And Google Maps is not.
Google Maps is not an option.
Yeah.
But we do put a piece of string in the cave to navigate by, so
should be fine then.
Everything's fine.
Google string.
So
Google string.
So Google string. That's good. I'm going to write that down. So the risks, the hazards are incredibly obvious, but at the same time, like I mentioned with anaesthesia, and that's why I feel there's a really strong parallel in these two disciplines of mine, is that if you're well trained and you've got good equipment and you're cautious and you plan and you do checklists and so forth, then all the risks can be really well mitigated and it becomes a very enjoyable experience. I'm not a courageous person in my view. I'm not brave. I don't enjoy danger. I don't get out of bed thinking to myself, I'm going cave diving, there's a good chance I'll die today. I say I'm going cave diving because I enjoy the meditative experience of swimming through these beautiful tunnels, and I love it, and I love being with my friends when I do it. So then I got thinking, well, hang on, why do these people think I'm crazy? I'm not crazy. I think I'm just a good risk manager. And I wonder, and I remember seeing that film Free Solo with Alex Honnold, climbing that wall without a rope and just being aghast, thinking, is there part of his brain actually missing that he can do that? And then I thought, well, surely not all these people who do stuff that frightens me, maybe they're just the same as me. It's within their comfort zone. Maybe they're just really good at what they do. They're very methodical at planning out the process, and therefore it becomes a safe and enjoyable experience for them. Even though I can't comprehend it, maybe for them it's like me cave diving. And so I thought, well, what's the best thing to do, especially in lockdown and quarantine? Start a podcast. You guys, I saw this funny meme where all these celebrities are saying, whatever you do, Australia, however bad it gets, please don't start a podcast. So I don't know if you saw that. So I started a podcast, and I thought I want to test my hypothesis that these people are just like me. They're maybe careful, thoughtful risk managers, and they're just good at what they do. So I set out to interview people, and of course, with this thing in Thailand behind me, it sort of gave me some credibility to approach some outrageously famous and incredible people, which I did. And every time they said, yeah, I'll do your podcast, I was like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
So I got to interview some amazing people and some people who were complete unknowns, but I thought had amazing stories.
Yeah.
So I did, and my hypothesis, I believe, perhaps with one exception, which I can mention, I think my hypothesis was correct, that these people aren't crazy. They're just bloody good at what they do, and they love it, and they're careful. The classic one is the base jumper. For me, that discipline seems so dangerous, and that's supported by the statistics, the mortality statistics in that sport, especially the wingsuit guys who fly. Proximity flying, I think it's called, when they go really close to the ground and through those gaps in the mountains.
They jump off the top of mountains, is that right?
Yeah, base means...
and buildings as well.
Buildings, antennas.
So not off a plane, it's like...
Yeah. So they're sometimes from a plane or a balloon or a helicopter,
okay.
but also mostly from the top of a big hill.
Yeah, okay.
And this guy, Sean Tumer, who's done the most base jumps of anyone in the world, he sort of teaches it and he does tandem base jump experiences and all this sort of stuff off a bridge in Wyoming, I think it is. He's done 7,000 or 8,000. And I said, well, why are you still alive, Sean, when all these other people have died? And he said he's actually lost count of the friends he knows who have perished in that sport. And he said, because I can walk away. If it doesn't feel perfect, if the conditions aren't right, I just don't do it. So he's found that balance of, working out how to manage that risk. So even that guy who presumably gets a squirt of adrenaline each time he does it, which is not why we go cave diving. Adrenaline is to be avoided at all costs, to be honest. Even he is this sort of amazing risk manager. So,
wow.
Yeah. There was one girl, though, who drives those top fueler drag cars, 2.7 seconds the whole event goes for, and 300 mile an hour or something.
Yeah.
And she was self-confessed adrenaline junkie. She just puts her foot down and just hoots and hollers the whole way down the track. And then at the end of it just goes, I want to do it again.
Whoa.
It's like a drug fix.
So when you were growing up, when you were younger, did you, what was your relationship with risk?
I was pretty cautious, timid kid, I think. I wasn't good at sport. So, in fact, I was a nervous footy and rugby player, for example. I didn't like getting hurt. And so that made me cautious about running into the ball and, and that made me a very second-rate.
A man after my own heart.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can relate.
I so wanted to be good at football and rugby because I love that sense of camaraderie with your mates. It's like, I imagine it's what people on the battlefield get that sense of that brotherhood of sharing something slightly scary and dangerous with a close group of friends. I wanted to get that sense of being part of that team, but I was hopeless. And so, I don't think I wasn't that crazy kid who was building, ramps to hop over on my bike. And I was not a daredevil. I didn't break bones and that sort of thing. So it was only later in life when I very incrementally started to get into this cave diving thing. And I think I just expanded my competence and my horizons to the point where, I always felt in control. Now, I have to say that Craig and myself in particular have a niche interest in cave diving, which is deep exploration, where statistically, again, the risks dramatically do increase. But I'm fascinated by the physiology and the physics and the stuff we have, the logistical challenges to overcome to safely push further and deeper into these caves. So the deepest cave dive we've done now is 245 metres depth underwater in a dive that took us a bit over 16 hours to complete because you have to decompress as you come back to the surface. And
16 hours. So does that mean you have to take all the oxygen with you in the one go?
Pretty much, yeah. We can stage it in the cave. As I say, it's very complex to do a dive like that.
You're underwater for 16 hours?
Yep.
Oh, my gosh. You exhausted at the end of that?
Yeah, it's pretty tiring.
Hungry?
Tiring day.
Pretty hungry.
Yeah, we can eat and drink a little bit.
Oh.
We have to, I don't want to sidetrack the conversation
How
too
do you
much
eat?
So we've got these habitats in the cave. It's basically, imagine a bucket upturned in the water full of air, and we can sort of crawl up into them and sit in there.
Oh,
so the top half of us can be dry for the last number of hours.
Oh, wow.
And so we can eat and drink and talk in there, but we're still kind of in the water under pressure.
What a surreal experience.
Yeah.
Talking under 250 metres in a cave.
Yeah.
That's an intimate conversation.
What do you talk about?
Well, actually, Craig hates it when I talk because he just wants to sit there and go into a bit of a trance because it's long, cold and painful and unpleasant, that decompression sitting there. It's still 6 degrees in the water in this cave in New Zealand we're exploring. So it's not much fun. So I like to pass the time just by rabbiting on and having a bit of a chat, and Craig's just like, just leave me alone. Let me go into the zone,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Remember
don't,
that time we saved like 12 boys in Thailand?
that old chestnut.
I would say I'm a risk avoider, and I'm not that proud of that. I think I wish I was keen to take on more risk. But I'm interested to know what you think the value is in taking on risks, even if presumably in the way you describe it, they're so thought out and considered and calculated that you're trying to reduce risk when you do it. but I'm fascinated of what you see the value of risk is.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something. It's kind of the point of the book, I suppose. Is do we all need risk in our lives? And hopefully, threaded through it is this message that actually risk can be good for us, and it doesn't have to be physical risk. It can be putting yourself out there doing public speaking or
Emotional risk, yeah.
doing a podcast. I mean, stuff that 5 years ago before Thailand would have filled me with so much dread.
Well, you messaged me last night and said you're about to give a keynote speech.
Yeah. So my life is now full of public speaking. I mean, that's well, firstly, it's the source of my income now, doing corporate speaking. It's allowing me to fund my passion, which has always been imaging and filmmaking, and now I'm sort of actually trying to make a living from that, which, if you know anything about filmmaking, is a good way to lose a lot of money very quickly. So so I have to maintain some sort of income while I test the waters there. But so I've had to adapt and overcome and become a speaker. For me, it's been a huge thing to put myself out there, and just doing podcasts like this is a big step for me. But what I've learned is that doing things that are difficult in life, and again, not physical risk, but doing stuff that is confronting or emotionally challenging is really empowering. And I have felt so much stronger for it. I still get nervous every single time, but less so as time goes on. And it's made me more confident, it's made me more extroverted. It's actually changed me as a person, not that thing in Thailand, but what's happened to me subsequently and the way I've kind of tried to take advantage of it to make myself different and better, hopefully.
I like how you reference it as that thing in Thailand. Well, that crazy weekend in Thailand.
I mean, it was a life-changing event. Not because of what I did, but what happened to me afterwards, I think.
Fascinating.
And, along the way, I've really solidified my views, which I actually expressed as Australian of the Year, that young people especially need to be able to explore their emotional and geographic boundaries, and I hate to sound like an old white man, which I am, and say that, the younger generation, they're all soft and whatever, but because my father said that to me and his father said that to him. But the thing is, something has changed in the last 20 years, and that is the advent of smartphones, which only appeared on the horizon about 2007. Can you believe how recently that was? And the social media and all the stuff that has followed. And so suddenly we're all living this virtual life on our screens to the exclusion of what we should be doing, which is being out on our bikes, hooning around the park with our little gang of mates, damming up the creek and catching tadpoles and falling out of trees and breaking bones and grazing our knees, all the stuff that is normal and important for kids. And, we need to be able to escape the watchful eyes of our parents from a pretty early age, actually, and go and do that stuff and do some naughty things and make some mistakes and work out where the boundaries are. And that way we start to learn what is safe and what is not safe. And we slowly expand those boundaries and learn to be risk managers. Now, if, and this is the second old man thing I'm going to say, is that when you're at school and you're not allowed to compete in a team against another team, you just have to be on the field with them and no one wins and no one loses and everyone gets a ribbon at the end of the day. Well, you don't actually learn what it feels like to lose and come last or come second.
Or to fail.
And to fail.
Yeah.
And that builds this sort of illusion of perfectness in life that is going to come crashing down at some point. It's unavoidable. Life is not fair and it's not easy. So what if it's the first time you go for a job interview and you get told, no, you are not good enough or not suitable for this role? If that's the first time you've ever been told you've lost or you've come last, you might collapse in a heap. And I have a sense, and I want to say I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or an expert at this, but I have a strong sense that that combination of living in this virtual world, trying to be perfect or trying to see all these people who seem to be perfect around us, in parallel with this kind of protected society that we live in where we never take any risks and explore our boundaries, it seems like a perfect storm which may be contributing to this mental health epidemic that we're seeing in young people today.
Beautifully said.
So that's the theory.
beautifully
That's
said.
the theory of Harris without any science or.
Well, it's such a major theme in this podcast from all the people we speak to. That is, but yeah, exactly like you said, beautifully said. It's spot on, spot on.
For a long time, I actually wondered: is this mental health epidemic true, or is it just now we're talking about it? And I couldn't actually decipher the facts, but. Having now spoken to people, who do understand this, the psychiatrists, and tried to read the research, I think it is a real thing. And I worry greatly for my own kids and for their kids, and what are we going to do to nip this in the bud?
I guess the other part of risk is that there's failure. There can be failure with risks. And I guess I'm interested to understand how you sort of compute and handle that calculation. And I guess also built into that is how risk sort of interacts with our personal resilience.
Yeah, I mean, resilience is a hard word to kind of even define, isn't it? I think it means, succeeding in overcoming adversity and not losing ground, but actually becoming stronger or building that strength, so when the next bit of adversity comes your way, you are more prepared for it. And I think, and what I'm trying to encourage young parents to do for their kids, because kids are up for anything at the end of the day. I think they'll, if you kick them outside and push them out the door and say, go and, play with your mates, that they probably will. You just got to get in early enough before they're addicted to their screens. It's the young parents we need to train to realise that actually the world is safer than it's ever been. Again, let's be clear, speaking for my privileged circumstance and, in the part of Adelaide I live in, we're very fortunate. But by and large, the world is safer, healthcare is better, and, stranger danger is actually, whilst we worry about it more, it's realistically, statistically less of an issue, I believe, than it was in the 60s and 70s. There's cameras on every corner. Yeah. The world is a safer place by and large. So why are we so paranoid about, taking risk or taking responsibility for risk is actually a thing? Especially in Australia, we are the most risk-averse country of anywhere I go and do my thing in.
Wow.
New Zealand, even the USA, people just, we've become paralysed by this fear of someone hurting themselves or someone having to be responsible. So taking risks and challenging yourself means building personal accountability, and that means looking inward, not outward, towards for taking responsibility, and therefore we become more robust individuals by doing so. If you go, I feel this way. I feel I'm injured or I feel bad or whatever, what can I do to fix myself rather than why isn't someone helping me, I guess is the first starting point,
This is much more trivial risk, but I think something I've had to overcome and I'm working harder, and I've found myself being better at it since having kids, because I want to try and model a different thing to what I know I was doing internally. But often I would move away from risk because I was too afraid of failing. And what would happen if I failed in any circumstance, in very trivial stuff, like, for example, public speaking. Not that I know that can be terrifying for people, and it was for me as well, but not life or death stuff I'm talking about. But the fear of failure can overcome and think, well, I won't be able to handle it if it fails. How do you interact with failure when it happens and push through to the next risk sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what sphere of endeavour I'm working in. Like in medicine, failure is devastating to me, and whether even just missing the IV, if I'm trying to put a cannula in your arm, before you go to sleep, if I miss that and have to injure you a second time, puncture your arm a second time because I've cocked it up, basically, that I can assure you that hurts me a lot more than it hurts the patient. I'm so critical of myself, and it's one of the problems with doctors and other professionals is we are so tough on ourselves, and we expect 100% perfection 100% of the time, which means that we don't handle failure at all well professionally. I'm actually, interestingly, here in Melbourne talking to doctors about resilience and agility this week, and Yeah, I mean, sometimes we are our own worst enemy, and one of the things I'm trying to teach these other doctors is to be not to be so hard on ourselves, and also to look after our colleagues, look after each other. So failure is really hard to handle from a professional point of view for me. Failure in other areas where I maybe don't care as much about, obviously it's easier. And for me, sitting at home not doing new things is much worse for my mental health than inventing projects or doing things to keep myself busy or trying new things. And I'm very guilty of like, oh, life's a bit quiet at the moment. Let's destroy that by, taking on a new book and a podcast and do some YouTube videos and plan an expedition next week. And suddenly my life's so frantic and hectic that I'm going, why is everything out of control? I hate this. But I do it to myself every single time, and I've realised that when I'm busy, I'm happy, and when I'm absolutely paddling underwater to try and stay afloat, that's when I'm actually most effective and sort of hit that flow state where life is good.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Beautiful.
Did you ever meet the kids in Thailand? Have you spent time with them or?
Well,
obviously,
it's been 3 hours holding.
No, I know.
Yeah, we had an intimate moment when I rendered them unconscious and pushed them underwater.
Yeah. Post that.
Probably not something you're supposed to boast about.
Was there a time afterwards where are you pen pals? Like, what's your relationship?
I mean, surely
with them?
their families, their parents must have got in touch with you at some point to.
So the short answer is yes. I've been back to Thailand twice, and I've got to meet some of the kids and some of the families, and I've had some very emotional meetings, especially with the mothers of a couple of the boys. It was really, really nice, actually. And I'm friends with a lot of the kids on Facebook. Unfortunately, there's no common language with most of them, so I just sort of look at their pictures and see that they're kicking a soccer ball around. They all look happy, and from what I understand, they've all done really well. Very sad to hear that one of the boys died recently in the UK. The captain of the team, Dom, died in slightly unclear circumstances. He was doing a soccer scholarship in the UK, and apparently he got a knock on the head at training and was found dead the next day in his apartment or his room. So haven't really heard exactly what happened there, but it's awful. And there's another boy, that boy I mentioned at the start, Abdul, who spoke a bit of English and said, yes, there's 13 of us. He's now in the US, in New York, doing biomedical engineering, and his English is great. So I've had some good chats with him, asked him some of the questions I've really...
So how old are they now?
Well, they were between 11 and 16 at the time, so 5 years on from that.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's funny, there's one boy called Titan who was this 30-kilo cheeky little guy with this big grin who became a little bit of a sort of a symbolic favourite for all of us. He was just this feisty little bloke, and you've probably seen him. He's in all the shows because he's just such a character. He's always laughing and cheeky little bugger. And I went back to work on the Netflix series in December, was it last year before? Anyway. And so we had dinner, and Titan was there, and he's 15, and he's taller than the coach now. So it was, to see these kids growing up and being with their family is obviously more reward than you can possibly imagine for us.
Incredible.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I have so many more questions. I don't really know how much time how long have we been going for?
I don't know.
This is my job to know this stuff.
We're on an hour.
My gosh.
Go, ask another.
When you're by yourself and you think back on what you did, how do you feel?
I don't dwell on it much, to be honest. I'm constantly reminded of it because of, the focus on and my speaking and all that sort of stuff. But I don't spend a lot of time actually thinking about the rescue itself. But when I do, I'm just incredibly proud of what we achieved, and what a privilege to be part of a team of upwards of 10,000 people, in or around that mountain, to be a part of that collective human force, mostly volunteers who came from all corners of the globe to help for those 13 boys.
Amazing story.
It is so powerful for me, and I think that's why the story has garnered so much interest and attention, because when all around us it seems bleak at times, when you see what we can achieve as a global community, when the focus and the goal is so clear, why can't we just get on the rest of the year,
Yes, it's such a good point.
Yeah.
I'm so in awe of and love what you did in the cave, but I'm also so in awe of and just love the person that you are, or the you haven't seen. I mean, your personality. I loved your humility and the down to earth, very grounded sense of a person that you are. I mean, we've only just met, but I do get that sense. What is it about your upbringing or your life that has helped you to be that way? I feel like a few people maybe in your situation possibly might have gone, and totally understandably, but would probably be quite. You're so humble. You've remained so humble in all this. I'm interested in that.
Look, I'm an incredibly privileged person. I grew up middle class family, never wanted for anything, always had a roof over our heads and food on the table. And I guess maybe through medicine, I've seen what life on the other side of the coin can be like, and I just don't take anything for granted. I think I probably do because I'm so lucky. But I try to remember that I am one of the very fortunate few on this planet. That has no stress in their life, no genuine stress. We make our own stress, obviously, and that is very real. But compared to so many people, I've nothing to complain about. I think my family was and is incredibly tight. I've got two sisters who I see a lot of. We're an incredibly close-knit little family unit. My parents were amazing. My father was an incredible role model to me. He was the most relaxed, laid-back bloke you could ever meet, and taught me some incredible lessons about how to treat other people. He was quite a prominent surgeon in Adelaide, but he had this manner about him of treating everyone as equals. And he had friends from the hospital. One was the guy who operated the boom gate at the hospital, and one was one of the guys who worked, in the basement pushing trolleys around or something. And because they shared this interest in birds with him, he had all these aviaries at home full of parrots and budgies and things. And these guys had that same interest. So he would go around to their houses and they would trade parrots and stuff. And so it just sort of taught me that, to find out people's backstories before you judge them. And one thing I've noticed is, in the last few years doing all these talks and things, when you get invited somewhere, they often send a car for you, and you get, there's someone driving the car. And so I like chatting to them and finding out what they're about. And, the stories of some of these people, especially people who've come from overseas, who have been professionals in their country, doctors, lawyers, teachers, whatever, and they've basically left that country because it's not safe or it's not a place they want to bring up their children. And they've sacrificed everything to bring their family here and to make ends meet. They're now driving a cab or a car or whatever, basically putting food on the table so that their children can go to university in a country like Australia or something like that. I mean, to me, that just, I don't know, it just blows me away when people are prepared to sacrifice stuff like that. So I don't even know if I've approached answering your question.
No, beautiful. I love that. Can I ask one more question before you jump in, Ryan? What did your dad say to you before you took off for the caves?
Well, he was literally, as it turned out, on his deathbed. He died on the last day of the rescue. And he hated me cave diving. He was, all my life, he was trying to say, I don't think you should do that anymore. It's really dangerous. And he was worried about it. And I had this running joke with him where I would say, yeah, you know what, Dad, you're right. That was my last trip. I've decided not to do it anymore. And he would go, oh, that's great news. And then he'd look at me and he'd realise that I was bullshitting. And he'd go, oh, you've got me again. And, it became a kind of a running joke. And so I think he said something to that effect, like, I hope this will be the last trip. And, but...
so that was the last time you saw him?
Yeah, last time I saw him. And then, it's kind of bizarre that as that last kid came out of the cave was probably about the moment that he died. And I went back to my hotel and texted Fiona, as I had done each day after the end of the rescue, just to tell her I was safe. And, of course, we were pretty, full of it by then. We were very excited all these kids had come out, but we're also exhausted. So I was having an early night. I got back to the hotel about midnight, and I rang her up, and she sort of burst into tears and told me that Dad had just died. And I went, how's that possible? On what should be the happiest day of my life. Just suddenly got this devastating news. But, he was a guy who loved life so much and loved people so much. And, with this cancer diagnosis that he had, the end for him was actually looking pretty awful. And he had always talked about quality of life and not quantity. And so I sort of realised that when he had suddenly just popped his clogs, as he did that day, just dropped dead, I realised actually what a blessing that was. He was 88. He'd had an amazing life. And he went out with a bang. And I just realised it would be selfish for me not to celebrate his life alongside, what had just happened in Thailand. And so I just sort of managed to turn it all around in my head. And just for the next few days, I decided to stay in Thailand, and we partied on something shocking. And the Thais were incredibly good hosts, I can tell you. For a few days, they just laid it on for us. And it was an amazing way to sort of tie it all up. But, yeah, a bit of emotional roller coaster, you can imagine.
Do you mind me asking if he knew the success of the cave diving with the boys?
I'm not sure. My sisters and my wife were going to see him every day and sort of showing him stuff that was in the paper, and so he sort of knew I was involved in something important.
Okay, but
but he was just starting to lose it a little bit. So yeah, hard to be sure. Yeah. But yeah, he knew I was up to some sort of mischief for sure.
Do you put any? And I'm guessing no, but do you give any?
No.
Wow, great answer. I thought that's what you'd say.
Yeah.
No, do you give any thought to the possibility of the bat signal going up again?
Oh, I thought you were going to say was there some spiritual kind of miraculous situation going on with all of this. I thought you were going to.
Well, no, I mean, feel free to answer that.
That was the no.
Oh, no, like, do you give any thought to the possibility that something horrible will happen? I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully there won't be a situation like that again. But there's such specific circumstances.
Yeah. Yes, is the answer to that one. We've kind of written up the process that we used in a variety of formats, and I've had a lot of interest from emergency services, military. People are sort of asking about the technique and what applications there could be. I've started to think about things like, those terrible ferry disasters where a ferry rolls over and people are trapped in an air bubble inside. There might be some people in there who are incapacitated or too frightened to dive out. Maybe we could use it for them. So, there could be an application for it. In fact, just a few days ago, I was on standby for a potential cave rescue in another country, which sadly didn't work out well for the people the person who was lost. But we've had several calls for international possible, recoveries or rescues that haven't followed through. But I don't want to get too old before they call me again. But that's what I've been doing this training for, and I continue to do that. So. Yeah.
Oh, it's an extraordinary story. It really is. Thank you so much. The book is called The Art of Risk, and I'm as I said, I'm a third of the way through, and I'm absolutely loving it. The podcast you mentioned before, the name of your podcast?
Real Risk.
Real Risk. There you go. Okay.
Harry, thank you so much.
Wow.
What a privilege. It really is such an incredible privilege to meet you, the person you are and all that you've achieved. It's wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, mate.
The Imperfects is hosted and produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. Our executive producer is Bridget Northeast. This episode is filmed by Andy Poole and edited by George Martin. The Imperfects is not a licensed mental health service and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, treatment or assessment. The advice given in this episode is general in nature, but if you're struggling, please see a healthcare professional or call Lifeline on 131114.